right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm so glad you've joined us today for part 4 and the final part of our series called Brand New. In this series, we have identified one big idea, and we're going to get right into it today. The big idea that we've identified in this series is this, that there's something about New Year's, about just new in general, that gives us hope. Like anytime there's something new in your life, there's hope for the future. And this is what happens at the New Year, in the New Year season. What happens every year is people get to New Year's and they reflect on the previous year and think about, man, I didn't like that in my life, and I didn't like that, and boy, that was a mess. And so there's like this hope and promise of, I want next year to be better. Next year's gonna be the best year. And so what we do is we create resolutions. And what resolutions really are at their core is their external behavior modification aimed at helping us become a better version of ourselves. But the problem is they don't work. And if you've ever made resolutions, you probably know this, unless you're like an extreme goal setter and really dedicated to that. Statistics say that 80% of New Year's resolutions are gone by Valentine's Day. They're just gone. Like they don't work. And the reason they don't work is simple, and that's been our big idea through this process, and that's that real life change happens inside out, not outside in. Real life change happens inside out, not outside in. Resolutions try to change us from the outside, and it doesn't work. So this has been our theme verse throughout this series. In 2 Corinthians, it says this: when someone becomes a Christian, he becomes a brand new person inside. Like that's what we want for you, to become a brand new person. He is not the same anymore. A new life has begun. So if I could say it this way, we believe that you don't need to become a better person, you need to become a new person. You don't need to become a better person, you need to become a new person. And so throughout this series, what we've done is tried to lay the foundation or lay the groundwork to help you go on this journey to becoming a brand new person. Because if you do, the internal change that happens in your life will give you the power to change all the external things that you don't like. So week 1, what we did is we just tried to help fire up your spiritual life. We gave you like a checklist to help you stay aligned with God. And then in week 2, we began kind of walking through some common resolutions and how this change on the inside can help you change those things. So the second week of the series, we talked about our bodies, the physical part of us, because we know that resolutions, almost always, there's something physical, like you want to lose weight, you want to eat better, you just want to get healthier, whatever it is. It's one of the most popular resolutions. So week 1, we talked about how if our spiritual life is right, it gives us the power to get our body under control. And then in week 3, we talked about our finances, because we all want help with our finances too, don't we? And we talked about how if our spiritual life is right, again, it gives us power if we follow the principles God gives us financially to have some real change happen in our lives financially. Now today we're going to talk about friends and relationships, because relationships are hard. And we just showed a preview video. In fact, we're so serious about this, we're going to devote the next 5 weeks as well to relationships, because everybody needs help with their relationships. So today we're going to talk about friends and relationships because they're high on our resolution list. So what I'm going to do, we're going to jump right into the Bible today because I want to show you a truth. What we're going to do is I'm going to lay out a whole bunch of scripture for you right at the top today, because I need you to see this truth that sets up the rest of the message. So we're gonna dig in today, and hopefully what's gonna happen is when I show you this truth, I believe it legitimately has the power to change your relationships forever. So here we go. This is in the very first story of the Bible. If you wanna grab your message notes or your Bible, you can go to Genesis 1. And so let me set this up. At the beginning of time, God just starts creating stuff. Like this is the beginning of the Bible, he starts creating stuff. The first thing God creates are inanimate objects. Sun, moon, stars, water, land, all that stuff that has no life in it. And after God finishes that, he moves in and starts creating living things that have breath in them. And when he starts creating the living things, he does something very different than he did with the things that aren't living. So we're picking it up in Genesis chapter 1, verse 11. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants. I want you to file that. That's an important detail, seed-bearing plants. And trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. That's another important detail. Like, how could God create things according to their various kinds if they were the first of their various kinds? The way he did that is the seed idea a minute ago. See, when God created the living things, what he did is he didn't just create the thing, but he put inside the thing to make more things. You following me? Like, he didn't just create the thing. What God did is he created a tree and he went, that's awesome, but I gotta figure out a way to make this keep going. I gotta figure out to take this really good thing and just pass it on down the generations because I want this good thing to continue. And that's huge, and you're gonna find out why in just a minute. And it was so. So the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds. And again, that phrase means with the ability to create more of them like it. And trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. So here's what I need you to see first of all in this first passage. Like, this is Genesis 1:11. Like, it doesn't get a whole lot earlier than this in the scriptures. The very first thing when God creates the living things is that God has a desire for the living things to multiply. Like, God doesn't talk about how beautiful everything is. He says, no, I want you to multiply, like reproduce. From the beginning, God's desire for living things is that they would multiply, and he put the potential in them to multiply. So now God, he creates animals, and then he gets to Adam and Eve. So we're gonna jump to Genesis 1:26. And then God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. And if I could give an aside there, you need to know that God did create you in his image and in his likeness. Like, there's something special in you. See, when God created the plants and the animals, he made them, plants have one part, they have a physical body. Animals have two parts, they have a body and a soul. You might think that sounds weird, but it's true. The soul being defined as your mind, will, and emotions. Animals have that. Like, that's why your dog gets really excited when you come home, and then sometimes he does things that you don't want him to do in your house because he's so excited that you're home. Animals have emotions. Humans are the only thing that have the third part. A body, soul, and humans have a spirit, which is the image of God in us. If you want more context on that, if that's throwing you off a little bit, you can actually listen to the first part of this message series, and we talked about that in depth. But we have a special part that is like God in us, and that's really important. And so God let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, just over everything. So God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. And then God blessed them, and he said to them, and notice, these are the first words that God speaks to humanity. And you got to understand, the first thing God says is important, or he would have said something else first. The first thing God says, be fruitful and increase in number. Be fruitful and increase in number. Like, God says, hey, go reproduce. That's the first thing he says. That might sound odd, but here's what you need to understand. God's desire from the beginning was always that there would be a transference, that there would be a reproductive process with living things to carry on the good parts of the creation. Like, in other words, God made humans and he went, this is really good, but I've got to figure out how to continue this good stuff on down the line. So reproduction and multiplication was important to God from the beginning. Now, listen, God's not just talking about physically here, and we're going to talk about that more here in a minute. But this is like God put a vehicle in us to reproduce body, soul, and spirit. And that's really, really important. But in order to understand why it's so important, we've got to look at one more passage today. So we're going to jump to Malachi. Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. So there's two parts of the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. The Old Testament is one big section. Genesis is the beginning, Malachi is the very end. Well, in Malachi, the nation of Israel is dealing with this problem. They keep asking God, like, God, where are you? Like, you're a million miles away. We don't know where you are. Why aren't you answering our prayers? And so this whole book is God answering the cries of the people of Israel through this prophet named Malachi. And this is what God says, or this is what Malachi says in Malachi chapter 2. Or this is God speaking, through the prophet Malachi. He says, and this is the second thing you do. You cover the altar of the Lord with tears and with weeping and crying, like your heart's broken, but he does not regard the offering anymore, nor receive it with goodwill from your hands. Like, they're saying, God, why aren't you listening? And God's going, yeah, I'm not listening. I mean, I hear you, but I'm not really listening. And the people say, for what reason? Like, God, why aren't you listening to us? And then God answers them. And this is huge. Because the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth. Like, he's been watching a dynamic take place that you don't realize how powerful it is. He says, who you have dealt with treacherously or with contempt. Like, you consider that relationship disposable. Yet she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Now watch this. But did he not make them one? Having a remnant of what? Of the Spirit. And if you notice, There's a capital S on that. That means the Holy Spirit, like the third part of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. In other words, what God is saying is you've missed the entire point of this. Like you forgot that your marriage, it wasn't just about you and your wife. It wasn't a physical exchange. It wasn't an emotional exchange primarily. It was spiritual. Like what God's saying here is, I'm not paying attention. I hear you, but I can't do anything with you because you have forgotten that your relationships are spiritual. And if you miss that, you mess up this transference process that I designed from the beginning, and I can't do anything. Like I hear you and I want to act, but I can't. Because there's a process that I set in motion that you're breaking. And when you break the process doesn't work. Then it gets even more interesting. And why one? Like what's the point of God bringing the marriage together? He seeks godly offspring. Like almost as if God is saying, hey, the only reason you get married is to have babies. And I'd just like to throw out there that Vanessa and I were doing our part. Like we're holding up this end of God's deal. We got 2, we're gonna have a couple more. If the 2 of ours stop running their mouth, then we'll probably have a couple more. They're too much like their dad. So in other words, what God did here is that God designed a system, and this is huge. God designed a system to pass the spiritual potential down. Like he says, your marriage, I brought you together and put the spirit in it, because then when you reproduce, that spiritual component passes on. Like it's as if God is saying, you don't just pass down your blonde hair and your blue eyes to your kids. Like we know that happens, right? It's always funny to me how when people have a baby, and we experience this so much with R2. Have you ever experienced this if you have kids? Like both sides of the family think they look exactly like you, like, oh my goodness, they look exactly like their cousin. No, they don't. Like that baby looks like an alien and mine's beautiful. But people do that. Like you don't just pass down your physical characteristics, although you do. But you also pass down your emotional characteristics, right? Like you pass down your habits, or not your habits, but like some of your personality traits. This is why historically we used to see a lot of, occupations would be passed down through a family line because the kids were good at the same stuff the parents were good at. This is also why my 3-year-old daughter recently informed me that I ruined her life, because I told my mom that when I was 2. So like our kids get these elements of us physically, emotionally, but remember there's a third part. There's a spirit in us, and that spirit gets passed down as well. Like these relationships are spiritual. And so God continues. He says, therefore, take heed to and say that word with me, take heed to your spirit. Like it's not a piece of paper. Your marriage, your relationships, they're spiritual. They're spiritual, and you have to know that today. Because here's what God was up to. God set in motion a plan from the beginning of time, that this seed idea, that through the seed, the good parts of you would get passed down from generation to generation. And that as they did, if the transference was good, that your kids would actually take what you were good at and they'd be a little better at it than you are. But there was a problem too with that in the potential for the good side to happen, there was potential for the bad to get passed down as well. Like God took a big risk when he did this. And you need to know this too. You have an enemy that's trying to destroy you. Like there is a devil, a very real devil, who is trying to destroy your life. And one of the quickest ways he knows to do it is to weasel his way into your relationships, because he knows that if he can mess up your relationships, he can break this transference process and mess up the potential of future generations. Like he can do it. I could wear you out with statistics. There's this idea in the Bible that a lot of people don't know what to do with and they really struggle with. There's a couple parts in the Bible where it talks about generational curses. And it talks about the fact that if a man sins, that his family line will be cursed down to the 3rd and 4th generation. And people go, whoa, wait a minute. What's God doing here? Because I don't like that very much. And so most people don't even touch it. They just kind of ignore it. But it's real. But it's not real from the standpoint of if I sin, God's not going, okay, now your kids are cursed because I'm just so mad at you. I can't stand what you did, so I'm gonna curse your grandkids and your great-grandkids. The idea is that God put this system in motion, that if the spiritual transference gets broken, like if I begin to live in blatant sin, I'm going to pass those spiritual characteristics down to my kids. It's not that God's saying, I'm going to do this. He's saying there's a process in motion that if you're not careful, you're gonna mess it up. You're gonna break the chain. And I could wear you out with statistics that show that this is absolutely true. I'll just give you one. Did you know that 97% of children who are abused grow up to abuse their own children? 97%. Because relationships are spiritual. And when that spiritual component gets messed up, it messes up the kids. And so what God's saying here in this passage in Malachi, he's not saying, listen, my biggest problem is with marriages that are broken. Like the church has kind of made that their pet sin. And don't get me wrong, it's important. Like God doesn't want those relationships broken. But it's obvious here that what God's saying, he desires godly offspring. That's why he made us one. In other words, when the relationship breaks, God's concern is not primarily what it did in the marriage. It's what it did down the generational line. What happens is that we break a chain and we break a system that is so hard to put back together. Now, it might be easy at that point to go, oh my goodness, like I've messed up all my relationships. Like they're all broken. What am I gonna do? But I don't want you to get down on me, because here's the cool thing. The next book in the Bible is Matthew. And that means Jesus came. And what happened when Jesus came is he went and he died on a cross to break the power of sin and to break the power of those generational curses off our lives, so we don't have to live that way anymore. Like we don't have to do it. Like if you've messed it up like I have throughout my life, if you've messed up this relational transference process, Jesus says, it's okay. I came and I died. I can give you a do-over. Like I can make you brand new and we can start fresh and we can get it right. But there's something that I think is even more cool than that. So if you look at the very beginning of the Bible, if you look at Genesis, God started the whole process with go and multiply. Like there's a transference process that I want to have happen. Go, multiply. And then the last thing Jesus said before he left the earth, like he came to earth, he was born, he lived his life, he died on a cross, he went to a tomb, he was raised again from the tomb, and then he spent like 40 days kind of like walking through walls and popping through locked doors and freaking people out. And then at the very end of his time on earth, he goes to the Mount of Olives, and right before he ascends into heaven, he gives the disciples one last command. And firsts and lasts are very important in the Bible. The very last thing that Jesus says to his disciples before he leaves, he says, go now and make more disciples. Like go and multiply. Like God starts the whole thing with go multiply, and he ends the entire thing with go multiply. So the first thing you need to know is that your relationships are spiritual, because that whole process is spiritual. Go multiply. It's not just about babies. It was never just about babies. It was about the fact that the way God designed the system, everything that becomes intimate reproduces. If there's any level of intimacy in a relationship, reproduction happens. And that's the first thing you need to know, is that relationships are spiritual. So I just want to take a moment here, and I've given you a lot of content to start this off. There's a lot of Bible and there's a lot of stuff. And I just want you to take a moment. My hope is that you just really grasp this idea, because the idea that relationships are spiritual is not the way we usually approach our relationships. We look at them as physical or emotional interchanges, and often that's all. But until you really grab hold of the fact that your relationships are spiritual, they'll never be very healthy. There is a spiritual component, and I can prove this to you. Who stabbed you in the back throughout your life? Who is it that's betrayed you? Like that has destroyed your life? Like I say that, and immediately for some of you, a person pops into your mind. I mean, just as fast as I can say it. And it may have happened 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, but somebody pops in your mind. And even more than that, it's not just that a person pops in your mind, but for some of you, there's walls that you build up because you were betrayed by someone at some point. There are emotional walls that you've built up where you won't let anybody into your life anymore. Like nobody knows that, but you do. Because relationships have, this is the second thing you need to know, relationships have lasting impact. Relationships have lasting impact. Like the ways that you've been hurt, there's a spiritual component, but the ways that you've been hurt, they don't just go away. I could also say, hey, who is it that's really pushed you forward in your life? Like who is it that has really just changed your life in a positive way? And you could probably name me some names. I'll tell you right now, I'm doing what I'm doing today because of a handful of people who throughout my life have spoken life over me and have believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for some of those relationships. Relationships have lasting impact. The third thing that you need to know about relationships today is that relationship choices are critical. Relationship choices are critical. The decisions you make about relationships will change your life forever. They will. Now, I've been doing this long enough to know that people in general think that that's not true. like we like to be a little bit naive and just pretend that the people we're around don't actually impact us all that much. I was a youth pastor for 8 years, and I dealt with this all the time with teenagers. I just knew if you want to know where you're headed in life, just show me your friends. Like, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Because your friends push you places. Your relationships push you places. They're critical. If you want life change in your life, you don't just need to make a resolution to go to the gym more. If you want to lose weight, you need somebody who will go to the gym with you. About a year ago, my wife bought me a membership to the YMCA. We were living in Maysville, Kentucky at the time, and I grew up playing basketball, and it's always been one of my favorite things to do, and the older I get, the more it hurts, but I still love it. And so she bought me a membership to the Y so I could start playing ball. There was a group of people who played every morning at 6 a.m. That's not a time I'm real familiar with. But they played every morning at 6 a.m., and I wanted to lose a little bit of weight, and I just wanted to start playing ball again. So she bought me a membership to the Y. And I started going, and the first couple weeks, I was just jacked up about it. I was like, I get to play basketball again. I hurt, but this is fun. And about week 2, my alarm went off, and it was like, really? It's 5? I don't want to get up. But it was amazing what happened, because there was this voice in the back of my head that was going, hey, if you don't show up, those guys, they might not be able to play. Like, there might only be 7, and if there's 7, they're not going to play, and then they're going to be mad at you because you didn't show up. So I'd get up and I'd go to the gym. If you want life change in your life, you need people who will hold you accountable. You need relationships. Relationship choices are critical because they're taking you somewhere. You want to get close to God? Are you dissatisfied with your spiritual life? You need people in your life who will push you spiritually, who will walk with you. You need people who will look you in the face and who will love you in your mess, but who will say, come on, let's get better. Let's walk together. Sometimes people ask me for parenting advice, which is funny. It happened a lot, actually, when I was a youth pastor, which was even funnier because I didn't have kids yet. Like, I was a youth pastor first at 22, and I remember people would sometimes ask me, like, what do I do with my kid? I don't know. I could be your kid. But people sometimes ask me for parenting advice. I think it's because people are weird. They think that pastors have this special connection with God. Like, we just sit around and do devotions and pray together at my house all the time. We don't. Like, come to my house 15 minutes after dinner's supposed to be ready, and you will know that there is no special connection that I have with God any more than you do. Because my kids are screaming just like your kids scream, and then I start screaming at them just like you scream at them, and then everybody's mad, and then dinner's terrible. Like, it happens. We don't have a special connection with God, but what I do know is that if you show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Like, I don't need to know a lot more than who are your friends. They're a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, if you want parenting advice, parents, be careful with your kids' friends because they change their life forever. And those of you who have kids that have grown up through, you know that. Or maybe even if you just look back at your own life, like the times that you were the most satisfied, the most happy, the most joyful in life were the times that you had the best people around you, weren't they? The times when you were the most negative, the most cynical, the most frustrated, the most bitter, they were the times that you had people around you that were frustrated, negative, cynical, and bitter. The people that you're around are a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a verse in Proverbs that says it better than I ever could. It says this: a mirror reflects a man's face, but what he is really like is shown by the kinds of friends he chooses. Relationships are critical. So throughout this series, we've given you some checklists. Every message, we've given you a series of questions to ask yourself to help keep you aligned to God's spiritual principles in your life. And today we're going to do the same thing. And my hope with this is that these are questions that as you ask yourself, it'll be obvious where the areas are in your life that you need to improve relationally. So this is the first question. Am I nurturing important relationships? Am I nurturing important relationships? Do you know why you need to nurture your important relationships? Because the devil's attacking them. And you can believe that or you cannot believe that. Like, I don't know how you feel about it when pastors or people start talking about the devil. I don't know, some people, it freaks people out, but it's very real. And you have an enemy who's attacking your important relationships because he knows if he can mess those up, that transference will cease to exist. It won't happen with your family. It won't happen with your friends. You'll just isolate, and you'll never be able to impact anybody. But the most important relationship you need to nurture, and this is a very pastoral thing to say, but it's true. The most important relationship you need to nurture is your relationship with God. Like for some of you, you don't have a relationship with God. He's just a Sunday God. You come to church and you sing a little bit and it's like, God wants a relationship with you. You need to spend time with God every day, because here's what happens to a lot of people. They come to church on Sunday and they have a powerful experience with God, and they make some decisions and they say, I'm gonna follow God better. I'm gonna live my life different. And then they go home and the next day they don't talk to God. Don't spend any time with God. And then people start whispering in their ear. Negative influences. And those negative influences begin to dilute every decision that they made on Sunday. And by the end of the week, you're right back where you started with no life change and going, well, what? I made a decision. You got to nurture that relationship. You need to spend time reading the Bible and praying every day. If you don't know how to do that, look, we try to help you with everything that you need here at City North. We are passionate about helping you take next steps in your faith. If you don't know how to read the Bible, if you don't know how to pray, we have Bibles in the lobby. Like, if you're reading from a King James version, you're probably gonna struggle. It's hard to read. It's just hard to read. We have NIV Bibles out there. They're yours. They're free. Like, go take 5. If you want them for your house, your work, your car, like, take them. I don't care. They're yours. We have reading plans out there. If you don't really know where to start in the Bible, take a reading plan. We have prayer guides. I'm so excited about our prayer guides. They're really, really cool. You can grab a prayer guide. I promise it'll help improve your prayer life if you'll just walk through the prayer guide daily. Spend time nurturing that relationship. You might say, well, I don't have time. I don't have time to pray. Hey, God does shower prayers. Like, he's cool with that. He prays in the car. Like, it's good. He doesn't care where it is. Just find a few minutes and spend time with him. What about your family? Like, you can't be a Disney once a year dad. You can't be a flowers on your anniversary kind of a husband. It doesn't work. They'll dissolve. And listen, this is a struggle for me. I'm a very, my mind's always ahead of where I am. I'm always just thinking other things and just moving all the time. And it's a curse, I guess, but it's hard for me sometimes. Like, often when I'm with my kids, when I'm with my wife, I'm thinking about something else. It's a struggle. You got to nurture the relationships or they won't work. Nurture it every single day. In Galatians, it says it this way. It says, serve one another in love. The entire law, like the entire Old Testament, is summed up in a single command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Like, get your relationships right. But then he says, if you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out or you will be destroyed. So you've got to nurture the important relationships. And the second thing you need to do is you need to sever the harmful ones. Am I severing harmful relationships? I'm going to say this again. I said it before. Everything that becomes intimate reproduces. Everything. Like, that's the natural order of life. When trees cross-pollinate, they reproduce. I won't go into humans and animals, but you know what happens. Like, when everything that becomes intimate reproduces, it's the natural order of things. Your relationships are the same. If you have an intimate relationship with a person, and I don't just mean physical. If you have an intimate emotional relationship with a person, you're reproducing. The spiritual component is mixing. What are your intimate relationships reproducing in you? Look, there's some relationships that are just bad for you. People don't like it when we talk about that kind of thing, but it's true. Some relationships are just bad for you. That doesn't mean you isolate. It doesn't mean you remove yourself entirely, because listen, Jesus calls us to be light to the world. But what it does mean is that you have to be honest with yourself about what relationships am I intimate in and how are they impacting me? How are they changing my life? Because they're changing your life. If there's intimacy, it's changing you. I told this to teenagers all the time when I was a youth pastor. Like, you have to be careful with your friends. The Bible talks about this constantly. In 1 Corinthians, it says this: do not be misled. Bad company corrupts all the good choices you're trying to make on Sunday. Like, if you're trying to get better, bad company's gonna mess it up. Proverbs says it this way: he who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. The Bible is serious about this. It talks about it a lot. Like, look at all these verses. Stay away from lazy people. Look at all the verses. Stay away from angry people. Look at all the verses. Stay away from immoral people. Stay away from greedy people. Stay away from unbelieving people. Like, it's everywhere. And it's everywhere because relationships are spiritual, and anywhere there's intimacy, there's reproduction. I'm I'm gonna give you a couple more verses on this. In Proverbs, it says, a righteous man is cautious in friendships. In 2 Corinthians, it says, do not be yoked together. That word means like have common fellowship with. Just don't get too close to people who don't believe. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common, or what fellowship can light have with darkness? Why does the Bible talk about this so much? It's because relationships are spiritual and they have a lasting impact on your life. Like, you have to know this. You have to know this. And for some of you, you're immediately sitting there bucking this and you're going, you're telling me to get rid of my friends. What I'm telling you is that your future and your eternity aren't worth those relationships. Your future and your eternity are not worth those relationships. See, God's rescue plan for this world, like, there's a lot of people in this world who don't know him. We talk about that a lot here. Within 20 miles of where we are, best estimates say about 1.5 million people don't have a relationship with Jesus. 1.5 million. You know what God's rescue plan for those 1.5 million people are? They're you. And they're me. Like, God's rescue plan for people is not that they would go stay in a hotel this weekend and pick up a Gideon Bible. That's not his rescue plan. It's people, it's relationships. God does everything relationally. And as long as you have relationships that are dragging you down, you will never be able to influence anyone else or point anyone else to Jesus, because you'll live stuck right where you are. You have to be careful. Start by nurturing the important relationships. Then sever the harmful relationships. And the last thing you need to do is you need to ask yourself, am I initiating meaningful relationships? Am I initiating meaningful relationships? In Ecclesiastes, it says it this way: two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If one of them falls, there's somebody there to catch you. But pity anyone who falls and is all alone. Now, I gave you the last point, and some of you, like, you're folding up your stuff. You're like, all right, it's lunchtime. It's really close. But I need you to stay with me, because this last thing might be the most important thing I say today, so I need you to hear it. I need you to hear it. There are some relationships in your life that you may not have that you need. Next week, we're launching a brand new small group semester. Now, we don't do small groups to create busyness in your life. We do small groups to give you relationships that are what I'm talking about, to put you in relationship with people who can help you experience freedom in your life. We do small groups because you need relationships in your life with people who you can take the mask off. And you can be real, and you can let them know about some of the stuff you struggle with, and they'll walk with you, and they'll pray for you, and they'll encourage you, and they will lead you right back to Jesus. You need those relationships in your life. If I could say it this way, one day it's gonna rain, and I don't want you caught in the rain without an umbrella. One day in your life it's gonna rain, and I don't want you caught in the rain without an umbrella. Don't do life alone. You need some people who love you just for who you are, who will encourage you and who will walk with you. And I'll be honest, when I start talking about small groups, I don't know what your experience with that has been. A lot of people get awkward. They're like, oh, I've tried a small group. Listen, I'll just tell you, small groups are awkward the first couple weeks. It's always a little bit weird trying to build new relationships in sort of a forced setting. It's always a little awkward. But here's what happens in small groups. About week 3 or 4, you start to get comfortable. I kind of like these people. I think so anyway. They're all right. And then about week 6 or 7 or 8, you'll find that one person who somehow there's just a better connection with than everybody else. Like one person who you just feel like you can be yourself with. And then what'll happen is you'll start to talk to that person. You'll start to be friends, and you'll start to tell that person stuff that's deep inside you that you don't talk to anybody else about. And when that happens, God does a miracle in your life, and you can begin to experience freedom for the first time. And you can believe me or you cannot, but I promise you it's real. And so here's what I want to ask you to do. I want to encourage you to do 2 things. One, I want to encourage you to consider prayerfully joining a small group, making that commitment. We run small groups in 13-week semesters. I'm not asking you for very long. I'm asking you for 1/4 of this year, for 13 weeks, to trust that God's system for you growing actually works, because he designed it, and I promise you it does. The second thing that I want to encourage you to do is not listen to the lies that are going to get whispered in your ear as I'm saying this. Because here are the lies that are going to happen. You have an enemy, right? I've told you this. And immediately as I say, I want you to connect with a small group because your life will change forever. Some of you are going, I can't do that. I'm too busy. I can't do that. I've tried small groups, don't like them. I can't do that. I have as many friends as I need. I don't need that. I don't really like people. I don't know what the excuse is. I don't know what lie he's whispering in your ear, but here's what I know. God honoring life-giving relationships where people know you and love you and walk with you and encourage you and pray for you are absolutely critical to you living a life of fullness and purpose in this world. You will never, hear me, you will never experience full, real life alone. You won't. I don't want that for you. I want you to have a life of purpose and of meaning and of significance. I want you to make a choice to step out in faith and join up in a small group. I do. And if you'll give me 13 weeks and if you'll commit to the process, like if you'll give it your all for 13 weeks, and if you come back to me and you say, it didn't work, I'll never ask you to join a small group again. It does. It works. I know it because it's worked in my life. When I was at my absolute darkest point, and if you want to know that story, I'll share that story with you sometime else. 2.5 years ago, when I thought my life was legitimately over as I knew it, God sent me a friend that I didn't want, that I didn't even know I needed. And that friend restored me, and he encouraged me, and he built me up, and he pastored me. And I'm here today because of Ben Stroop. I would not be standing here today if God hadn't sent me a relationship for that spiritual transference to take place. My life was hell. And Ben helped make me whole. And I want that for every one of you. Will you bow your heads with me? With every head bowed and every eye closed, some of you really need some help in your relationships. And I know that because in a room of this size, I've just been at this long enough that I know there's enough people here that some of you have some relationships that are messed up and that are broken and that are full of pain. You've been messing up this transference process and you don't want to anymore. That all begins with a real, authentic relationship with Jesus Christ. Like, I'm not saying that means it starts with joining a church, because that's not what a relationship with Jesus is. That doesn't mean it starts with joining a small group, although that helps. It starts with a real, authentic relationship with Jesus where you talk to him. God doesn't just want to be your Sunday God, he wants to be your friend. So what I'm asking you is this: are you close to God today? Like, is that relationship real? Is it impacting your life? Or the easiest way to know if it's not is this: is there a weight on your life? Is there a weight on your shoulders? Like just a burden that you can't seem to get rid of? That's the easiest way to know. Are you close to God today? Or does he seem like he's a million miles away, like there's a weight on your life that you can't lift? Here in a moment, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna pray a simple commitment prayer that if you need that relationship with Jesus today, you can pray along with me. And in a moment, God will make you brand new. He'll take everything and make it new. Everything. But before I do that, we do this every week. We're not gonna embarrass you. We're not gonna make you stand. I'm not gonna draw any attention to you. But what the Bible says is that if you believe and confess, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, he will save you. And so what I want to do is if you sit there today and you're just sitting there going, you know what, I'm not close to God, but I want to be. Like maybe I had a relationship with Jesus a long time ago, but there's a weight on me, there's a burden, and I just can't lift it, and I'm tired. I want something new. I want to restore my relationships. I want to do relationships in a new way today. If that's you today, and you want to begin that relationship with Jesus in a fresh way, I would just ask right now, I'm not going to embarrass you. Would you raise your hand? Would you raise your hand for me? Awesome. That is amazing. Amazing. Great. You can go ahead and put your hands down. I'm going to pray a simple prayer of commitment. Now, there are no magic words in this prayer. It's just a simple prayer of confession. If you raised your hand, or even if you didn't raise your hand, but you know you need that in your life today, would you quietly pray with me? Just say, Jesus, I believe in you today. God, I believe that you died on the cross for my sins so that I could have a relationship with you. God, today will you make me clean? God, will you break the curse of sin off my life? Will you make my relationships brand new today? God, give me the strength to start every day off with a relationship with you. God, come close to me. Make your presence real in my life. Thank you for saving me. Amen.